I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to interCHANGE. Thanks for joining us. We have lots of things to talk about today. We'll talk about Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley and whether inflammatory comments she made nearly a quarter a century ago should and will be held against her. In the presidential race, are things settled, or is it way too early to say that the contest will come down to Hilary Clinton and Donald Trump? We'll talk about whether schools are overreacting to close down every single time somebody makes a bomb threat. And we'll talk about the move to push the legal age to buy a pack of cigarettes and smoke a Marlboro all the way up to 21. All right, before we get going, let me introduce everybody. You all know longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, who spent many years here as a broadcast journalist and many years after that as a legislative staffer over in Madison. And Denise Callaway, former TV news reporter, now a communications and public relations professional. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's talk first about Rebecca Bradley. She's in a tight race to hold on to her job. This past week, some pieces she wrote nearly a quarter century ago for the student newspaper when she was an undergrad at Marquette University have caused quite a commotion all over the state. She compared abortion to the Holocaust. She said she had no sympathy for people dying of AIDS and called gay people queers. She apologized and said those views have nothing to do with the person she is today. So, do we write these off as the immature ramblings of a very conservative kid, Denise, at a Catholic university?
Well, I think there are two different things here. One is the language that she used, but the other is the tone of it and the demeanor. So I think people can change their minds. They can grow and evolve. But I think what disturbs me as much as anything else is the tone of it. The way she talked about people who were dying of AIDS, and that she had no sympathy for them. They were basically killing themselves. That kind of demeanor is something that really concerns me, and I don't think it's the kind of demeanor that you want on the bench. It's a sense of not just the words she used, but quite frankly, the viciousness with which those words were used, that they were meant to inflict not just a point of view, but hurt and shame. And the way she talked about feminist, you know, you don't have to be a feminist. I mean, that's fine. But I don't think that we have to use the kind of language that she used to be able to express a strong opinion. And what concerns me, again, is the demeanor. And I don't know how someone's demeanor changes that much in a quarter century. I think people's opinions can evolve, but demeanor is something else. And I do think that these writings were also just so, they were meant to incite. They were meant to harm. And I do think that at some point in time, we are responsible for what we do. Whether it was a quarter century ago or it was 3 days ago, we have a responsibility for the things we do and the words we say. I think it'll be up to voters to decide whether or not that reflects the person she is today, or whether or not that matters. That if at one point in time she had such vile things to say about people that in their mind, you know, that disqualifies her as being a judge. It certainly concerns me very, very deeply.
But Kevin, should we all be held responsible for things we said when we were 21-year-old kids?
We were, all of us, at that age, young and stupid. I was.
Speak for yourself.
I was, and you were too. But I am of the belief that you can grow and evolve and mature from the time you're 18 to the time you're in your early 40s. And what's going on here is pretty obvious. It's slimy, it's scummy, it's disgusting, it's despicable what the Journal-Sentinel is doing.
It's fair game.
What happened 24 years ago? What happened 24 years ago?
It's not like we're talking about the fact that she jaywalked 24 years ago. I mean,
she wrote stupid things, although I will say this.
Repeatedly wrote stupid things.
I agree with her on the whole abortion description in her writings. She was merely equating the slaughter of one innocent group of victims to another slaughter of an innocent group of victims. The other things, yeah, she can be criticized for, and she apologized, and she had a bad week, and she's humiliated. But for heaven's sake,
change my mind about this, Kevin.
You know, it is to me remarkable okay, if you just take judicial philosophy and put hers side by side with Joanne Kloppenberg's, I don't think it's a tight race. I think it's a slam dunk. And what the Bradley opponents are doing now and carrying water for her, it's pretty obvious, is they know they can't win if it's a discussion about the issues. So they have to bring up, I'm sorry, all this garbage, and that's exactly what it was. And to me, it's remarkable that the hatred, and I'll use that word that's been often misused and overused on this program, the hatred for the governor, for conservatives, is so deep that we will sink to these depths to flip the conservative state Supreme Court, that the newspaper would sacrifice and abandon its journalistic principles. As one person called into a radio station today, very upset about
some right-wing show,
said, you know, what's next? That Rebecca Bradley wet her pants when she was in the 3rd grade?
It's very different, and I can understand why conservatives are pushing back like that.
And she dated somebody when she was separated from her husband. How is that a news story when that happens all the time?
The story wasn't that was not the story, though. That was not the story. It was that she attempted to represent this person she was in a relationship with in a custody battle.
Which the court said was fine.
You have kids. Your kids today aren't the same as they were when they were 20 years old, were they?
You know what? I wrote a column when I was in college for the student newspaper, and I went back. Actually, recently went back and read some of them, and they're damn good. And while I may have been more naive and not known as much then as I know now, I was the same person. You would recognize the column I write today from the column I wrote at Indiana University. You really would. And to suggest that this is not an issue. And as Denise said, I'm surprised you even mentioned the word hate, because these columns reeked with hatred. They were ugly pieces, and I don't blame her for being ashamed of them and humiliated by them. But
what the Journal Sentinel doing is horrible.
You all
new standard.
No, they quoted
it's
her.
Standard of journalism. That has sunk to new lows.
Is quoting something that a candidate said, and let me tell you exactly how
she was 18.
How this applies to this race, particularly on the issue you mentioned, abortion. Okay, inflammatory language about abortion, calling abortion murder, baby killer. No matter when you get it, if you get it the day after you had intercourse, you're killing a baby, even though no baby exists. And calling that murder. And even I was more, the fact that she's a homophobic bigot. And may still be.
Maybe was, but it's not today.
May still be. It's one thing. But even the column about Clinton's election, a moderate Democrat got elected president of the United States, and she says the people of America must be either stupid or evil for electing a baby-killing, queer-loving socialist.
She was young and stupid. I had said that, but that was so long ago. That was so long ago.
One final point, seriously.
You two support this kind of shoddy journalism. I'm stunned. I'm stunned.
Say this.
Make your point, and then we'll move on.
The point on abortion. Cases involving abortion are going to come before the Wisconsin Supreme Court. She has refused before this election to say what she thinks about abortion. She says, well, it might come before me, and so I can't say what I think. The truth of the matter is we now know.
What should matter is upholding the Constitution, not whether she's pro-life or not.
She's an extremist, and any case about abortion should not come before that woman.
All right. We shift gears. Let's talk about presidential politics. It certainly seems like the media has already narrowed the field down to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So, should we still be asking if Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio still have any chance whatsoever?
Well, come on, let's be honest here. Marco Rubio's in free fall. His campaign is fizzling. He may not win his own state. He has no path to the general election. The same can be said about John Kasich, who may not win his own home state of Ohio. If one of those two states doesn't go to Trump, then it's still a horse race. If Donald Trump wins those two states, he builds even greater momentum. But even if he wins those two states, he still has to pick up the rest of the way 52% of the available delegates. And that's not a slam dunk. That's not an easy task for him. So it's still not over. And if you can winnow the field on the Republican side to what it appears to be now is it's going to be a Ted Cruz if Rubio and Kasich do and they should drop out, then it's a different ballgame, because if it's a Cruz versus Trump battle, then I don't see that as necessarily a Donald Trump victory.
Do you see Sanders having any chance whatsoever?
I just think I'm even more terrified by what Kevin just said than the idea of Donald Trump. If it was Ted Cruz. I think Bernie Sanders is in a really interesting place. He's going to be taking a look at some northern states where everybody said there's no way he was going to win Michigan. No way he was going to win Michigan.
It was Hillary Clinton. Weren't they?
And you know, he did beat Hillary Clinton. I think that if he's able to pull off a win, let's say in Ohio, I think it does become a very different kind of race. I still think at the end of the day, if Bernie Sanders does, I do believe at the end of the day, Hillary Clinton is going to be the nominee of the party. But it's going to make it a very interesting race. And that is precisely something that she needs. She needs someone to continue to push her on these issues and to really begin to help prepare her for the general election. Because whether it's Cruz or it's Trump, it's going to be a wild fest, because you've got two candidates in Trump and in Cruz who number one, don't really tell the truth, and secondly, go out of their way to tell falsehoods about other people. So, you know, I think if this race continues for her, it is a good thing, because it does help to prep her for what certainly will be a tough general election. Not necessarily tough because I don't think she'll be able to win. I do think she would win against either Cruz or Trump. It's just going to be vicious.
Trump said a few times this week, we're going to attract a lot of Democratic voters. As a Democrat, do you worry about that? That if Hillary is the candidate, that a lot of Democrats will say, we like Trump?
No, I don't. And the reason for that were two reasons. The so-called Reagan Democrats, the right-wing conservative Democrats who vote for Republicans, are already voting for Republicans. They're probably already voting in those Republican primaries for Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, and they don't vote for Democrats in presidential politics. No, I'm not worried about him attracting Democrats. Let me tell you this, though. Denise said it. You know, we've heard a lot about establishment leaders in the Republican Party are terrified of Trump being the candidate. You know, the other candidate they're terrified of is Ted Cruz.
Well, they don't like him.
They know that both of those men are going to drag the Republican Party down to defeat because they're extremists. They say crazy things. You know, Ted Cruz wants to carpet bomb Muslim countries. He wants to build as big a wall. In fact, he's going to have Donald Trump build his wall against Mexico. And so, you know, those are both crazy men, and they're terrible candidates for your party. And I'm sorry, it's all over. It's all over for your party. But let me tell you this: in the Democratic Party, no. Here's the good part. Here's the good part. Democrats, they're very happy with either of those candidates, Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton.
They are not enamored with Hillary.
They are going to.
They don't like her.
They are.
She's bland.
Come together.
She's a liar.
You're wrong.
They're not. They are not real thrilled about Hillary.
All right, next topic. Police have arrested a 16-year-old boy in connection with some bomb threats made this week at West Allis Central High School. On Monday and Tuesday, they had to evacuate the school, sweep for explosives, didn't find anything. On Wednesday and Thursday, they just canceled classes altogether. Is this an overreaction, or do they really have no other choice than to play it safe, Denise? I mean, what happens next week? If they get 3 bomb threats next week from some other kid, do they call off school again?
Right. I mean, I don't want to judge what somebody else's decision was, because I don't know all the details. But I think the risk you begin to run into is that a couple of risks. Number one, you know, if kids see that they're obviously, we know now it was a kid who made the call. If they see that they can get out of school for a little bit of time on a really nice day, they're going to try it again, and they're going to see what happens. The other thing that concerns me is that in some ways, by going through your evacuation plan, you've really kind of signaled to anybody who might want to do harm what you do and what your plan is. So I think there are ways that you can be safe that don't require you to evacuate a school. We've got a really great police department here in Milwaukee that's, just outstanding at being able to come in and assess situations. Worst case scenario, if people think that something's there, the sheriff's department, their bomb squad is just outstanding. I think the idea is that you have to take it seriously, and I certainly believe that is what school districts around this area have done. There's the question, though, and people have to make up their minds on this in their own school communities. What is that definition of safe? My concern is, and I think we've seen it played out over and over and over and over again this week, is that when kids see other kids getting out of school, they're going to try the same thing because they don't want to be in school on the nice spring days. So, I do think it's an issue, but I do think there's also that safety concern there. You don't want to show your hand in terms of what you do should there really be a situation like that.
Anytime a school gets one of these kooky calls or somebody scribbles on the bathroom wall, there's going to be a bomb tomorrow or a shooting tomorrow, is the school district just supposed to say, we don't believe it? Or
well, no. I mean, you do your due diligence and you sweep the school, you search it, and so forth. But I don't think you necessarily automatically just call off school, because how many times has this happened and nothing is ever found, and then the punk wins, unless of course he's caught. And then what do we do with him? I mean, do we slap him on the wrist, or do we give swift and hard punishment? What made no sense to me this week was that you canceled school in West Allis, and yet on Thursday night at West Allis Central in their big field house, they held a state basketball tournament game. And there will be another one there Saturday afternoon. So wait a minute, it's not safe for kids to be in the classroom, but it's okay for them to be in the basketball gymnasium. So, it's going to get warmer and warmer, and the more you give in to these punks, they're just going to keep doing it. So you make the penalty stiff. You catch them, you prosecute them.
Sheriff Clark said today they should prosecute the 16-year-old kid as an adult, and if he's found guilty, send him in prison. Is that
he's an idiot?
Too stiff of a penalty?
It's ridiculous. He's a 16-year-old dumb kid. We were just talking about dumb kids before. Bradley wasn't a dumb kid. She was a senior in college, but. No, you don't do that.
What do you do?
Well, one thing you do, I agree with both of you, is you don't have to close up your school because you got a phone call. The reason, we know why schools do that. It's not so much that they really think it's even a real threat. It's a CYA thing. It's like, we'll be criticized if someone finds out we got a call and then something happens. And it's like, well, we didn't kept them safe.
But it never does.
It's like terrorism. It's like, you can't present terrorism. So we're going to, beat up on whoever's president of the United States if there's a terrorism attack. But it's stupid, and we know that most of these are just kids.
Right.
We know that most of them, and there are ways to, they sweep schools and they got dogs and they find out things, and you don't have to close down your school, but you also don't have to overreact. And because some 16-year-old kids said and did a stupid thing, adolescence is the worst time of life in your entire life. Everything is serious, and everything is ending your life. And if you break up with somebody,
so you make a bomb threat because it's so tough.
You might. I mean, you're crazy when you're an adolescent kid. You really are.
Unless you're a conservative at Marquette,
and you don't have to go to prison because you were an adolescent kid.
The world is a different place because we have seen bad things happen in schools. So I think it is diligent for schools to do what they do, and that is to work with police, assess the threat, and to make good decisions about what they need to do.
But don't cave in.
Last topic. In California this week, lawmakers raised the smoking age from 18 to 21. If the governor out there signs it, you'll have to be 21 just to smoke a cigarette. Is this an example of the nanny state telling legal adults what they can do with their bodies and a legal product, or is it something that you'd like to see other states all do too?
I don't like prohibition. I really don't. It's stupid. It doesn't work. I think there are good reasons to discourage things that are going to hurt people's health. Smoking is a public health problem. Alcohol is a public health problem, and in fact, illegal drugs are a public health problem. But we've criminalized illegal drugs. We now legalize alcohol, and but we play around with this age thing. When we raised the age for drinking from 18 to 21, people said, well, good God, we draft kids and send them, to die in foreign wars, and they're not allowed to drink alcohol. And they could say the same thing about these smoking laws. Everything you don't like, you don't have to pass a law against. You can educate and you can discourage and try. It breaks my heart to see young kids starting to smoke, because most adults these days know better, and we think they should know better too. They're supposed to be smarter than we are.
But it is a legal product.
It's legal, but it's also lethal. I mean, you're hurting yourself every time you smoke. You can make the argument that that's not the same with alcohol, with moderation. But when you smoke, you're damaging your body. Period. And this isn't a bill or law aimed against smoking. I kind of side with the health advocates on this one, who have pointed out that 90% of smokers start smoking way before they're 18. And okay, well,
long before it's legal.
The 18-year-olds are just going to, and are right now buying the cigarettes and giving it to young kids. Well, the argument is that, well, if the age limit is 21, that the 21-year-olds are going to be less apt to go and get those cigarettes and then hand them over to young kids. I don't think it's prohibition. It's just saying that, like alcohol, we're going to make it so that you don't start smoking real early and hurt yourself.
Would it make more sense with such an addictive product, Denise, just to make the product itself illegal?
Well,
that'll never happen.
It'll never happen. Being a former smoker, I have yet to kind of say, this is a really important role that smoking played in my life, and it was a really good thing that it did for me. I mean, smoking does not really have any redeeming social value. It doesn't. It is an addiction that you have, and that is a hard habit to break. So the idea of doing something to try to set up a barrier so we don't have kids 13, 14, 15 years old starting to smoke and growing that addiction that's going to stay with them, or that's going to be really hard for them to break, is a good thing. But I don't think the answer is simply just raising the limit for the legal age to buy cigarettes to 21 years old. I think that what we absolutely have to do is to spend more time, more money, more energy in educating kids at that age about the dangers of smoking.
Denise, I hear you, but
I just think we need to do that.
Who doesn't know? I mean, even 5- and 6-year-olds know that smoking is bad for you.
Part of it is...
You don't have to do any more education.
I think
everybody knows smoking is bad.
I think you do, because we were just talking about adolescent brains, and the adolescent brain is not fully formed. The adolescent brain does, you can't just say it once, like smoking is bad for you, you're going to get cancer or wrinkles or whatever. You have to find different ways to repeat the message. Hey, whatever works for some people.
Okay.
You have to find different ways to reach young people, and because their brains are still forming, you got to keep doing it.
All right, we move on. Well, when a Wisconsin judicial election makes the news pages of the New York Times, you know you've entered a peculiar realm. But that's how it's been this week with the Rebecca Bradley story. A big deal, a really big deal, or much ado about nothing. Time for some further thoughts on the controversy from another college newspaper columnist, Rick Horowitz. Rick.
Only one of these has spouted venom. So let's talk about queers, degenerates, maybe even angry, militant, man-hating lesbians, feminists. Welcome to the world of young Rebecca Bradley, or as she was known back then at Marquette, Rebecca Grossel. She felt strongly, so she wrote strongly. College kids do that. She also wrote hatefully, pitilessly. That's a different matter. That's harder to explain away, even all these years later. And now she wants to make her temp job permanent. Now she wants a full 10-year term on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I mean, even on a court where one justice tried to choke another justice, you'd think there'd be some standards. No bigots need apply. No such luck. Oh, and it's not about being politically correct. It's about showing some basic respect. But that was a long time ago, her defenders claim. She's evolved since then. Here you go. Better? Hey, the spigot might have evolved too, but I wouldn't bet on it. And the same with Rebecca Bradley. Once a hater, or at least until we see convincing evidence otherwise. Look, I wrote for my college newspaper too, even longer ago than she did, and lots more often. I wrote columns practically every week for more than 3 years, some political, some not. There were events and people during those years that made me plenty mad. Wars, assassinations, campus crises. but it wouldn't even have occurred to me to pick on the dead and dying, to disparage and demean them. In her case, these were AIDS sufferers, homosexuals, many of them, others intravenous drug users, the vulnerable, the outsiders. But in the face of all that tragedy, not a shred of sympathy from the future Rebecca Bradley. Calling them queers was just part of it. She actually condemned what she called misdirected compassion for the degenerates who basically commit suicide through their behavior. The young lady was cold. And now she's not? My views on these issues have changed, she says, now. Besides, she says, her past comments have, quote, nothing to do with the issues facing the voters of this state. That's for the voters of this state to decide, right? So decide. What is the half-life of hate?
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm, enjoy the rest of your weekend, have a wonderful St. Patrick's Day.